Hey, my ADHD family, welcome to another episode of ADHD Love Parent Talk, where we talk about all things ADHD. Today, I'm very excited to have my guest, Katy, who actually invited me on her show, her podcast. So I'm excited about talking about that today. But we had such a great conversation. I wanted her to come on my show. So I'm so glad she accepted. So, hey, Katy, how are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then why do you know so much about ADHD?
Well, I actually was a journalist for about 20 years. I discovered journalism at my college newspaper, and I struggled in school, like so many women with ADHD, and really struggled to kind of find my passion. And when I discovered the school newspaper, and I just like found that thing that got me out of bed, leaping out of bed in the morning, I loved it. And I did that for 20 years. And now, in retrospect, I realized why I loved it so much. It was deadlines, it was late nights, it was exciting, every day was different. And yeah, I mean, that was great. And then I had a baby. And as we know, as mothers, everything changes.
Right.
I couldn't work late nights anymore because my baby gets me up no matter what in the morning. And so I was sort of looking for other other journalism type jobs and became more of a freelance. My husband and I were living in New York City at the time, and just sort of like, I had really struggled with babies and motherhood. And by the time we had my second, I really wanted to just be a full-time stay-at-home mom
Okay.
because working and I just suddenly I went from having this job that I love to feeling like I was bad at my job and then also
Mhm.
bad at being a mom,
Mhm.
and a lot of that struggle and that juggling that I now realize was due to ADHD, but I didn't know at the time, was really, really difficult for me. And so I ended up being a stay-at-home mom when my second was born 9 years ago. And we left the city and we moved out to the boonies. And that was how I ended up getting into health coaching. And so actually was a Weight Watchers leader, which I'm very embarrassed
Really?
about
Wow.
at this point. I started out as a Weight Watchers leader because I had gone to Weight Watchers and had lost all this weight. And it was this life-changing moment for me. And I loved being a leader because, it was like you're on stage. I loved it, the people, everything. And I loved giving out little awards to everybody. Again, realizing now how much, we love those awards and the dopamine hits and all of that. And it was a great job until it stopped being a great job. And I started really, really struggling with the weight coming back. And I developed a full-blown binge eating disorder
Mm.
and was really kind of hiding the fact that I was really, really struggling with the fact that this weight was coming back. But I was also being this Weight Watchers leader who was talking about how great Weight Watchers was. And I kept seeing all these people who kept coming back over and over and over again, who said, Weight Watchers is the only program that works for me. And I kept thinking, like, it's not working if you're coming back over and over and over again.
Right, right.
And so that was when I discovered intuitive eating and sort of realized that, that the dieting and the diet industry is actually really quite toxic, and kind of you end up in this yo-yo dieting cycle where you
Right.
just end up gaining more. And I started realizing that dieting is actually the number one reason why people gain weight. It's really the number one predictor of weight gain. And really kind of reevaluated my whole life. I was a mother to a daughter, and I was like, what am I teaching this girl? And I just sort of went through my own personal transformation where I became an intuitive eating health coach, where I was taking women and helping them remove themselves from the yo-yo dieting and binge eating cycle, and kind of embracing a more holistic approach to their health and wellness
Mhm.
outside of this diet paradigm. And so I really, like, the clients I worked well with were clients who struggled with binge eating, because that was something that I personally had gone through. And again, I still was not diagnosed at this point. And then when I did get a diagnosis, I like all of these light bulbs went off, and I made all of these connections that binge eating, especially, and just eating and yo-yo dieting and body image are some things that women with ADHD struggle with a lot. And I was realizing why, impulsivity and inattentiveness, like these are all factors that contribute to a lot of difficulties that we have. So I quickly pivoted and I was like, I know who I want to work with. Like, I want to work with women who have ADHD and really kind of feel like everybody but them has figured out eating and exercise and nutrition, and they still feel like they didn't get the manual.
Right. That is too awesome. So let me tell you,
Yeah.
or let me ask you, so what age were you actually diagnosed, and then what type?
So my therapist, who I've been seeing for 6 years or so, she has ADHD, and so she started recommending to me that I look into it. Very kind, just gently, kindly nudging me and saying, she was seeing these patterns of the fact that I would get super, super interested in things and have this manic energy. And then I would become really super depressed and almost despondent. And she would see this woman who was like very bright and very accomplished and a great mom and a great wife. And I just like dumped on myself all the time. I just felt terrible. And I think it was really frustrating for her. And she kept suggesting that I had ADHD. And I even took an online test like a year ago, I think. And aced it, of course, but it didn't like imprint on me until the lockdown and the pandemic and that, and with remote learning, and suddenly my husband was home all the time, the kids were home, the house was a mess. We used to have a housekeeper, but we didn't have a housekeeper anymore, so I felt like I was the only one who was holding all of this together, and I just like had a meltdown. And so I got the formal diagnosis in the fall of 2020, where I actually like went to my primary care provider and went through and got the actual formal diagnosis. But I think it was probably around the summer of 2020 that I really like started to hyper focus on ADHD and really like deeply relate to all of that information. And then, what I did immediately was I started binge listening to podcasts, and I joined every Facebook group I could think of, and I followed everybody I could find on Twitter and Instagram, and I watched your videos, and I realized, again, I was sort of like these light bulbs were going off, where I was like, I learned so much about myself by listening to other people talk, by listening to interviews by other people talking about themselves, which is something that we love to do when we have ADHD. We love to empathize and share personal stories. And right? And yet it also is one of those things that I think we tend to feel really insecure about, because we worry that people think we're selfish because we're always bringing it back to ourselves. And we're like, no, that's how we learn. That's how we understand and communicate. And so that was when I kind of had that light bulb moment where I was like, I would love to interview other women who are going through this similar experience as me. Why don't I just start my own podcast, and it'll give me a great excuse to reach out to women who I think are really cool and have an intentional one-on-one conversation about our experiences.
And that's awesome. And we're going to dig deep into that piece of it, because I think it is so important to, as I already explained to you, or as we had talked before, being able to have a community and connect with other women and being able to hear their stories is just so important. I know when I started this journey, I felt like I was the only person. I didn't realize that there were other people going through the same thing as I was. And what you're doing is so important, because as women, again, we feel so alone until we realize there's other people there. So I do want to dig into that, and who you talk to, and what your focus group is, or what age range. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let me ask you, so when you finally got that diagnosis, how did you feel? And then you said that you listened to a lot of podcasts and and YouTube channels. Were there any other steps that you took, or any strategies that you put in place once you got that diagnosis?
Oh gosh. how did I feel? I mean, that is a loaded question. I mean, it is an emotional roller coaster, right? I mean, I think I actually just put out a post today on like the 7 steps of an adult diagnosis. And because there's the denial of like, I don't have ADHD, I'm not hyperactive, I've never been hyperactive, that's for boys, right? And then you start to think like, wow, these ADHD memes are really starting to make sense to me. I'm really like, they're really hitting home. Um, and so at first, I think when I got a diagnosis, I was really excited because it was just like, oh my goodness, everything made sense. I was going back through my whole life, my schooling, my relationships, my friendships, everything, and traveling, like just my hobbies, and I was like, it was just light bulbs everywhere. And it felt great because it really sort of felt like for the first time in my life that I had an explanation for so many things that I had secretly struggled with. And that was just elation. I mean, that was just such a great feeling. But then right after that elation, and so hear people talking about how this is a superpower, and it's like, yes, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Um, but then came like the grief and the resentment. And so there's the grief, which is like, wow, I really had a hard time, like I really struggled and I really suffered. And what do I do with that? That's a lot of really, it's difficult. And then of course there's the sort of the resentment side, which was like, what would my life have been like if I had this diagnosis? Why did nobody see this? Like why the signs were clearly there. Why didn't anybody notice? And, just feeling like, you just want to give that girl a hug. And so there is a lot of sadness, I think, that underlies a diagnosis. But then, because we have ADHD, we have a lot of grit. We really are very good at picking ourselves up by the bootstraps and getting back to work. And so that was kind of the next step, which is like, wow, I really am a hard worker. And I have actually done a lot in my life to help myself and to get where I am. And my self-talk is so much better, and I actually my self-esteem is so much better. And so then it gets back to that feeling of elation where I sort of felt like, I was explaining to somebody the other day where I said I felt like a phoenix, because it was like it took an emotional meltdown for me to really take this diagnosis seriously. And then now I just feel like I'm rising and rising, and the world is my oyster, and I just feel like there's so many possibilities, and I'm just so much nicer to myself, and then the final step is advocacy, where it's like, oh my goodness, there must be so many women out there who are suffering like I did, and I need to help them, and I need to spread the awareness and information, and I need to just all of these people who might be struggling and don't know why, they need to know that this is life-changing. So that's there's the roller coaster, and it goes you go back and forth, you go back to the grief. I think I go from that swing of yes, this is amazing, and then also realizing it's not there are elements of it to be a superpower, but it is a disorder. And we have been sort of, we do live in a society that is catering to neurotypicals, and we've had to work harder and kind of honor that struggle and honor the disorder part of it. And advocate, and that helps you advocate for yourself too, I think.
Absolutely. So what are some of the things that you have done differently now that you have your diagnosis?
Yeah. Well, I certainly use a lot more. I mean, I've always relied on to-do lists and constant reminders popping up on my phone, and timers and alarms. Those are things that I've always sort of intuitively used. And now I realize why I needed those. And so I do them with a lot more intention and without a feeling of shame or guilt. I'm like, okay, these are structures that I require. And so now that I have much more of a conscious awareness of how important structure is, I use that a lot more in my life in terms of pattern planning. Pattern planning wasn't a term I even knew existed until my diagnosis. And I read Driven to Distraction. And he talked about pattern planning, and I was like, oh, like I need a reminder that goes off on my watch to tell me to feed my kids. And like, that's okay. You know, like basic daily,
I have a
right?
5:30 timer.
Right? Because you can be so engrossed in something, and then your poor kid comes in and they're like, I'm hungry. And you're like, oh crap, I totally forgot I have to take care of humans. And so like, it's been very helpful for me to just remind myself of everyday things like brush your teeth, or take water, and certain things that, it's not, that you really just forget.
Yeah.
And that's the other, so that, and daily exercise is one of those things that I sort of always knew intuitively that I felt better and I had more focus, but it wasn't until my diagnosis that I really kind of read up and understood how important elevated heart rate and cardio is for our brains. And so that's something that has just become like a non-negotiable for me, is like getting out in the morning, taking my dog out, having a brisk walk, and really just like getting my heart rate up. And that's kind of like, it's my second cup of coffee, I guess.
Very nice. Now, do you talk about your ADHD in the household? Do you share what's going on with you?
you know that's a really interesting question, because I know I've met so many women who had a child who was diagnosed first. And then in their research on how to help their child, they started to realize, oh, this is genetic, and I'm relating a lot to this, and maybe I should get my own diagnosis. And so I didn't have that experience. I sort of came to it on my own and didn't even think either of my kids had it. And now, of course, I am evaluating everything they do, and everything my husband does. And I'm just constantly like, who has it? Who has it? And my son is 9. He's in 4th grade. I think he absolutely has it. And my daughter, who's 13, I think also could have it. She doesn't struggle in school anywhere near as much as he does or I did.
Okay.
But I also think that she's very, very good at like creating structures for herself and setting herself up for success in a way that I think she's just sort of like better at intuitively, getting to those things that I now have to actively help my son do, but she absolutely needs a body double if she wants to clean her room and like stuff like that I'm sort of like, I see a lot of it. So I do talk very openly about my ADHD with my kids and my husband. I talk, they know about that I've started this podcast, and it's like 100% my hyper focus. So I do talk about it a lot with them. But my husband and I sort of had this ongoing conversation with whether or not we should push for diagnoses for either of them.
Okay.
Because he sort of is worried that a diagnosis is going to, especially with my 9-year-old, he's worried that it's going to, there's going to be stigma there. And he feels like I think he feels like he might feel like he has a learning disorder, and therefore he'll feel bad about himself. And my point of view, and I totally get why he feels this way, and I feel, it's coming from such a place of love and protection. But my point of view is, if I had had a diagnosis when I was a child, like everything would have been so different. And yes, I am his mom and I'm able to help him in ways that I would have either way, diagnosis or not.
Right.
And we're in kind of a weird spot right now with remote learning, whereas I am able to have a lot more hands-on with him. Mm-hmm. Whereas once he goes back to school, like a diagnosis will give him the 504 that he needs, and he'll get him longer tests. And so it's all new right now in our household. So it's an ongoing discussion as to the sort of importance of getting this diagnosis. But for now, like I said, I'm able to give him the help that I know he needs, right, regardless.
Because you're with him. So that.
Right. Cool. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So that's really interesting. So, as you said, you're not the only family that goes through this. So for other families, what would you say, or what would your thought process be for those who are struggling, whether they should get their children diagnosed or not, or at least get the testing performed?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I say to women, because I've reached out to women to be guests on my podcast, and they say like, I'm not yet diagnosed, I'm self-diagnosed. Is that okay? And I think there's like this multi-step process with a diagnosis, because there is some part of us that wants a doctor to like officially say we have ADHD, because a diagnosis is like a pathway to medication, which is fine. Like I get it. But I think there's also a part of us that we just like we live with so much self-doubt that
Right.
we want a professional to officially, like I made my doctor say it out loud to me because I was so worried that I was going to leave my appointment and like maybe worry that I misconstrued something somehow. And so I was like, I need you to say the words. Oh, I don't know if I even answered that. I have combined, by the way, if it's not obvious. But I,
I ask you again later, but that's perfect.
um, but I was like, I need you to say out loud to me before I leave this room, you have combined ADHD, or else I will always wonder.
Mm.
And so I do get how important it is to get a doctor's diagnosis. And I think that that is a process that you should take at your own time. However, I honestly feel like if you are relating to ADHD literature, information, conversations, memes, TikTok videos, I mean, the people I meet who have ADHD, when you just, especially an adult diagnosis, when you discover this world of information, I mean, it hits you in the gut on
Right.
such a deep
Right.
level where you're like, I found my people. And like for the first time, everything is making sense. Like that should be a tip off. That alone, that feeling is a tip off that you have ADHD. And then the self-diagnosis is fine at that point because you're going to start doing your own research. I mean, you're a puzzle solver, you're you love learning, you're going to go down those rabbit holes and you're going to help yourself because you have grit and you're a hard worker. And those are the things that I think are so important to remember, which is like, we're so down on ourselves, and yet we are really, really good at um, doing the research and learning and solving problems. And so I think just sort of look at yourself and your family in that same way, which is like you've got all the tools. It's just for whatever reason, just like making that connection in your head that this has a name and what is causing all of these struggles, like just sort of having all of those dots connect for you, I think is enough. And just go through with that. And then at some point, if you feel like medication is the next step, then yeah, of course, get the doctor's diagnosis. But I don't feel like it's absolutely necessary to begin your journey by any sense.
So I really like that. And I also like the fact that you talked about finding your people. I mean, it was really interesting. I was sitting with a group of ADHDers and we were just talking about something. And usually when I have a conversation with a group of people, I'm very conscious about how I say things or how I present things. And with them, I felt comfortable just being me. And that is an amazing feeling. And it's not that I'm fake with other people, it's just I kind of hold back on certain things. It's almost like masking, right? And so just being able to be me and be free with what I'm talking about and just be open, it was such a wonderful feeling. And so, yeah, I just finding that community is just so important.
Right? It's like there's this shorthand that you have. Yeah, it is. It is. And that's a great point too. Like I don't think we really realize how emotionally taxing
Mhm.
masking can be in all of its different various forms. And I think, yeah, relationships, absolutely.
Love
Uh,
it. I love it. I do. I love it. I just love being in this community. So, so I want to dig into your podcast now. And yeah, it is such a great podcast. So I'm very excited about what you are doing. So tell us a little bit more about your podcast. And obviously you're talking to women, but are there certain age groups that you're looking at? Just tell us a little bit more.
Well, initially, thank you. I again, it still amazes me that I'm doing something that is so fun and so rewarding to myself, and that anyone is listening. Because I think that was my biggest concern, was that like I was going to have these great one-on-one conversations, but nobody else was going to listen to them. Even though the whole reason I started the podcast is because I love listening to other people have conversations,
Yeah.
but I couldn't make that connection in my mind. Luckily, it is resonating and people are listening, and I'm loving it, and it's just been a wonderful process. I initially started out reaching out to women who I'm most related to. So I was reaching out to like women in their 40s or women who are moms. And then and women who had recently been diagnosed. And it's sort of evolving because I'm sort of more reaching out to just anyone who interests me within the community. In fact, I reached out to, I had a guest, the episode hasn't aired yet, but I had a guest who I reached out to her and she wrote me back and she said, I'm actually non-binary and I was actually assigned male at birth. Do I count? And I was like, of course you count. And that was sort of the moment where I thought, oh my goodness, women with an E is actually not very inclusive. And so I like quickly went back and changed as much as I could in my branding to women with an X. But it's difficult because some things are still women with an E, some things are women with an X. Neither, they're which is which and what is Googleable and all of that. I'm still it's still a jumble, but I just really wanted to like make that umbrella incredibly as inclusive as possible. So yeah, I've had a few guests who are non-binary. I've still sort of stayed within the women umbrella. But I've had guests now who were diagnosed as children because I'm realizing that even when you are diagnosed as a child, if you're a grown-up, you still go through a lot of the same struggles. And so I was sort of fascinated with what that was like. And yeah, so it's just sort of going meandering on its own path as we do. Right. And it's evolving and the conversations are evolving because I'm also realizing that I've interviewed 30 plus women at this point. And so I've learned so much from my guests and their stories that like, I'm kind of accidentally becoming an expert now. And so these conversations are almost, they're evolving from me just asking questions to having much more like almost, like counseling input sometimes in these conversations.
Absolutely.
And so that's been an interesting evolution as well, where I'm just like, this is how I love to learn, like that was another thing too. Like I didn't do very well in college, but I'm like getting my master's in ADHD right now just from interviewing other women.
And that's really interesting because, obviously for editing, I have to listen to the videos again. And it gives me a chance to listen to it again, but listen to it again thoroughly because the first time I'm just interviewing the person and I don't really have a chance to hear everything they're saying. So it's like I am, listening to it for the first time, just in detail. And it's just, like you said, it's amazing what I learned through those videos. And it just helped me grow and, like you said, be more of an expert or just understand things a little bit better. So I enjoy listening to the interviews over again and just learning from it. And so for your women, what do you think some of the common struggles, the ones that you interview, what are some of those common struggles that you have seen come up?
Oh gosh, I think the common struggles are definitely motherhood. Do you remember that TikTok? I think it was a TikTok video where where they asked like, "What's the hardest thing about motherhood?" And you're like, "It's definitely it's the children. It's the children."
Oh, I love that.
And so I think, whenever I'm interviewing a woman, especially a woman who still has young kids, like I feel like under the age of 6, like I just want to cry when I interview them. I get so emotional because I remember how hard that was. And my kids are 13 and 9. And so I feel like I'm in this wonderful sweet spot where they're like self-sufficient, but they're not yet like self-destructive, like they're in this wonderful place where I enjoy having conversations with them and they're just great and they're funny and interesting. And I don't have all of the like boring, horrible part of having babies. And so I think a lot of us really, really struggled in silence because motherhood is sold to us as this thing that's supposed to make us so happy and so fulfilled. And so many of us didn't find it that way in the beginning. And so I always want to like remind women who have young babies, I'm like, it gets better. You are in the trenches. Just like hold on. And I think, so I think that's a big struggle. And I also like, I interview a lot of entrepreneurs because a lot of women with ADHD tend to be self-employed entrepreneurs. And so I think we all sort of share that issue of being self-employed and also being terrible at money and terrible at planning and needing business coaches and juggling work and parenthood and all of that. And so I think, I think a lot of it is just the crazy, just like managing the crazy, managing the chaos is something that we all really have in common. And then again, I think really that the grief, that grief of looking back through our childhood, and especially, it's just such an emotional journey. And I think, that the sadness that comes with like what could have been, and yeah, of just feeling like we just wanted to be a good kid, like we're just such people pleasers. We just want to do the right thing. And so really like just feeling empathy and feeling I know I said this already, but like just feeling like you want to give that little girl a hug all the time. I feel that way towards other women when I talk to them. Just like, yeah, like, like it's hard.
Mm-hmm. It is. It is. And I don't think people really get that. And, especially those who who do not understand ADHD, they don't understand all of the struggles that we have gone through, from childhood to now, especially if we've been undiagnosed. And so, yeah, so being able to connect to other women again who understand the same thing is just a wonderful feeling. It just really is.
Yeah. And, that reminds me too, connecting with women is so important because I think that's another thing that I think a lot of us had difficulty with, which was female friendships and female relationships, and always feeling like there was a behavior that was expected of you and that you weren't reciprocating, or I think a lot of us share that feeling like we were just a bad friend for a lot of reasons, And so if we felt like we were a bad friend, we would retreat from those friendships, or whatever was causing us in our lifetime. I think like we've always really sort of felt very lonely and felt very isolated from other women. And so it has been really so wonderful to suddenly be like, oh my God, not only are there all these women that I relate to who are wonderful conversations, but we cannot talk for 6 months and it's totally fine and nobody can, there's no judgment. And that's also been a real relief, like you said. Like it's almost like that shorthand, which is like, like we could be so in the moment and have these great conversations, but then we go back to our lives and it's okay that we're not constantly checking up on each other.
That's exactly right. It's so funny. So what do you do? I mean, first, how do you handle everything? Because you didn't really have a chance to share. What do you do in terms of being a mom, a business owner, a podcaster, a wife? I mean, how do you balance it all? And then what do you do for self-care?
Oh gosh. I honestly think I am better at balancing since my diagnosis. And I think I'm a better wife, 100%. I'm a better wife since my diagnosis because, because of my self-talk and my self-esteem. I think, I spent so long, I've been with my husband for 20 years and I've always said the same thing, which is, why are you with me? You're so out of my league. I know why I'm with you, but I don't know why you're with me. And I'm such a hot mess and I'm such a bad mom. And I'm so, and I thought to myself, like, how exhausting it must be to be married to somebody like that for so long, somebody who you love and really admire, and to listen to them kind of dump on themselves like that. And so when I I was actually kind of nervous when I started feeling more like self-esteem and excitement. And I was talking about ADHD all the time. I was almost nervous that it was really going to shift the balance in our relationship, because my husband was always kind of like the savior and I was always the hot mess. And we had those roles. And suddenly I wasn't feeling like a hot mess anymore. And I was really nervous that it was going to shift the balance. Like he was not going to feel like I needed him as much anymore. And it was the total opposite happened. It was like, he's so happy because here's this person that he's loved all these years who is finally discovering herself and finally like that phoenix, and so it's been really wonderful for our relationship, for our conversations are just elevated. And I think I could say the same thing about just my approach to parenting too. Like I don't know, I just sort of have this feeling like I've got this in a way that I never did before. And so I think that has kind of really helped me managed to, it's helped. It's been a lot easier for me to juggle for a lot of different things in my life, because now I can ask for help in a way I never was able to before, because I always sort of had all of this shame and guilt around having to ask for help, which I don't feel anymore. Now I'm sort of like, this is something I have executive dysfunction. I need help. Like, like it's really easy for me to ask for help in that way. And so I think like, I'm much easier at like having boundaries, time boundaries, and things that have all like these dominoes that have all kind of had a have come from my own self-talk and my own kind of just being nicer to myself, and watching how that my life has blossomed as a result.
Oh, and how do you take care of you through all of
you know,
this?
I know, it was funny. I was like, impulsive shopping. I don't. I was just talking to my business coach the other day, because my podcast had been like getting all of these, had been hitting all of these milestones that I had set for myself. And she was like, "What are you going to do to celebrate?" And I was like, "I don't know." And she was like, "Do you take baths?" And I was like, "No." um, and and so I was like, I think I need to like go on a shopping spree, which is kind of hard to do right now, because I don't know about you, but like shopping is just not fun right now. It's like a stealth mission. You get in, you get out.
Exactly.
Um, but I do like online shopping is definitely my Achilles heel.
You prefer to go
But
out? Is that what it is?
no, I just mean like I have impulsive, add to cart, add to cart, add to cart
Oh,
syndrome
gotcha.
when it comes to online shopping. So I think that's probably how I like to get to. I do like to shop. That's probably my biggest self care. But then, I mean, I think there's a lot that's also self care, just in terms of like yoga and meditation. I am a certified yoga instructor as well, and like
Nice.
yoga is a huge part of my life. So that's definitely, I don't even think of that as self care, because that's like breathing at this point. But it is. I don't know where I'd be without it.
Very nice. So, that's just too funny because it's funny listening to you because you have a lot of tabs open too. And I was just telling my mom every time I mention something, I'm like, I'm just waiting for her to say something to me, right? It's just like I mentioned something new that I'm doing. So it's funny listening to you. You're like, oh yeah, and I'm a yoga, instructor, I'm a certified yoga instructor. It's like that's another thing about ADHD, right?
I know when somebody's like, "What do you do?" and you're like, "Oh, are you ready for this?" Don't even get me started on the volunteer stuff I've gotten roped into.
Oh, that is hilarious. That is hilarious. So, your podcast, where can they find it and how often do you post?
Yeah, so I post weekly every Monday. The podcast is called Women and ADHD. Sometimes you'll find it with an X, like on Instagram. It's women and ADHD with an X. But then the website is women with an E, women and ADHD.com. But you can find it anywhere on podcast platforms.
Okay.
And like I said, I have interviewed so many women, and there's such good interviews, and I really want to get them out into the world. And so I'm like starting to put out bonus episodes on the weeks that I have time, because I just want to
Okay.
get them all out there. But yes, my minimum is every Monday.
Every Monday. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience? Any tips, tricks, anything about ADHD, anything that you've learned from the women on your podcast, anything you want to share?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, I think the single most important change in my life. Oh, I think, okay, first of all, the diagnosis, I've said this a couple times in when I've been speaking with other women, which is I really think that the diagnosis is kind of half the treatment, like it really is. Just that awareness, just that knowledge is the beginning of such an amazing journey. So trust yourself and trust your instincts. And if you are relating to this on a deep level, that's enough. Like you don't have to wait for anything else. There's no official checkbox. This is, as I think Ned Hallowell calls it, a positive diagnosis, right? Like it's all good.
Right.
And so I think that's something to embrace, and embrace the positives, but also understand that it's totally normal to feel a lot of grief and sadness around this. And so find your community, find those people, and feel understood, and in a way that you probably haven't for a long time. And that's sort of what I'm hoping the stories of the women I interview are available, just to really kind of see yourself in others. I think it can be so healing.
Very nice. And are there any other resources? So you mentioned Driven to Distraction, right?
Yeah, so when I first was diagnosed, I actually like binge listened to podcasts because I'm such a podcast junkie, and I actually typed women and ADHD in the search bar, which is why I ended up calling my podcast Women and ADHD, because I was like, I wanted to be like really simple. And so I found Tracy Otsuka's Smartass Women, ADHD for Smartass Women. I like binge listened to her. I really related to her. We had a lot of parallels in terms of our children and everything.
Nice.
And I binged on that. And then I also binged on I Have ADHD with Kristen Carter.
Yeah.
And I watched your videos, and by the time I actually like slowed down enough to read a book, I mean, I didn't read it, I listened to it, but that was the Ned Hallowell's Driven to Distraction was really great. I'm really glad I did. It really is like a sort of the like encyclopedia of all the different symptoms. I related to so much of it. I was really glad I read it. And now I'm halfway through ADHD 2.0, which just came out. It was kind of the follow-up, because Driven to Distraction was written in the 90s, and so it's pretty outdated at this point, and especially when it comes to research on women and girls. And so I'm halfway through. That was written by Ned Hallowell and what's the John Rady is the other guy. And it actually, I'm surprised. I think it really stands on its own. I don't think you need to read it as like a sequel to Driven to Distraction. I think it's a great primer, and I would totally recommend it, because they go through a list of like, do you relate to the following? And they have these like long checklists where you're listening to it and you're just like, yes, oh yes. Those moments where it's like, yeah, they cover it a lot. And so I would definitely recommend ADHD 2.0. I don't know, like I said, I'm not sure how much of it is women specific, because if it is in there, I'm not there yet. But as a woman, I certainly relate to everything that's in that book, and it's much shorter too. It was only like 5 hours.
Oh, that's not bad. Really, it isn't bad. I'm still. Yeah, it's like I have a 48-hour book that I'm still not done with. So that's not bad.
Yeah. Oh no, I've had those too, where I feel like and then I like I feel like I'm listening to 3 books all at the same time, because I'm like doing I'm constantly, I can't do anything without listening to something in the background. So
that's good. That's a good habit. That was really good. So last question, if they want to get a hold of you or have any more questions for you, can you share your Instagram handle and any other resources, any other ways to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my coaching website, my health coaching website, and the Instagram that I am most active in is my Worth It with Katy. So it's Worth It with Katy, Katy.com is the website. And then you can find me on Instagram at Worth It with Katy. And then the podcast is Women in ADHD, which you'll find in Twitter and Instagram. But yeah, the best way to reach me is through worthitwithkaty.com. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Katy, I'm so glad that you came on the show. It was wonderful talking with you. It was fun, as I expected. Your wealth of knowledge.
So thank you for having me. I love talking with you so much.
Yeah, it was fun. So that was another episode of ADHD Love Parent Talk. Thank you again for joining me. If you like this content, please do not forget to subscribe and make sure you hit that notification bell, so as more videos come out, you will be notified. And if you like this video, please hit the like button. All right. Have a wonderful day. Bye, Katy.
Bye.